Hello, dear students. I welcome you all on behalf of Sri Jendra Rank Zone classes. Dear students, we are continuing a plant physiology, and in the plant physiology, first we are going to discuss a chapter that is a transport in plant. So today we are initiating this chapter. So we know that in animals, as we know, we have a one proper circulatory system which includes the heart, veins, arteries, all this. Okay, they are forming a what we can say a circulatory system. But in transports, the circulatory system is not there. So, in case of plants, the transport occurs from within a cell or from one cell to another cell or for a long distance through the xylem and phloem. Okay, such a way the transport take place in case of the we can say the higher plants. So now, if we introduce it, then dear student, plants need to move molecules over a very long distance much more than animals do, obviously, because the plants are comparatively larger in size or taller in height. Besides, plants do not have a circulatory system. So they have to particularly move molecules to a very long distance. So water taken up by the roots, root when absorb the water and it take up, it has to reach to all parts of the plant and obviously up to the very tip of the growing stem. So this is the how they are absorbed from the roots, then transported to the tip or the other plant organs. Now, in respect to that, oppositely, if we talk about the photosynthesis or food which is synthesized by the leaves, that also have to be moved to all parts, included the root tip, embedded deep inside the soil. So water and mineral, as we have discussed, they are transported from the root to the other plant part, but from the leaves to the other plant part, the food is transported like this. So there can be a short distance transport or there can be a long distance transport. So movement across a short distance, that is like within the cell, across the membrane and from cell to cell within the tissue has also to take place. Okay. So in a flowering plant, if we talk, the angiosperm, the substances that would need to be transported, the substances which are regularly getting transported are the water, mineral nutrient, organic nutrient, and the plant growth regulators. Okay, so these are the substances that are need to be transported regularly. Okay, and they some are transported from root to the stem and upper parts. So to transport, they have to particularly deal with the distance. So distance can be short or long. And over a small distance, the substance move by a diffusion and by a cytoplasmic streaming. Okay. And that is supplemented by the active transport. So actually the transport, if we talk, it is of two types, that is short distance transport and long distance transport. Here first we are going to talk about short distance transport. And in short distance transport, the substance move by a diffusion or by cytoplasmic streaming in the movement of cytoplasm, and it is obviously a supported or supplemented by the active transport. And for this active transport or a diffusion, which is a transport occurring over a short distance within a cell or from cell to cell, xylem and phloem like vascular tissue are not required. So transport over long distance processed through the vascular tissue, that is xylem and phloem. But over short distance, the xylem and phloem are not required. So when the transport over long distance occur, it is called a translocation and it is obviously a long distance transport. So this is the second type, long distance transport. Okay. And over a long distance, substances move by a bulk flow or mass flow. Okay. So translocation through the xylem and phloem. When we see the rooted plant, the transport through xylem, the water and minerals is essentially unidirectional from the root to the stem. If we talk about direction of the transport in flowering plant, there is a complex traffic of molecules, probably very orderly. moving in different direction. Each organ receives some substance and gives out some other. So for this, in rooted plant, if the transport through the xylem takes place, then xylem carry out a unidirectional transport from root to the stem. Okay. So minerals and water are absorbed by the roots and transported to the other plant part. Now, organic substances and mineral nutrients, however, undergo multidirectional transport, but water mainly go a unidirectional transport. Now, if we talk about organic compound, that is a food synthesized in the photosynthetic leaves, are exported to all parts of the plant, including the storage organ. So, such a way the transport is carried out by this phloem, and from the storage organ, they are later re-exported back. Okay. So, in phloem, we can say they show the bidirectional or multidirectional transport, and the mineral nutrients are taken up by the root and transported upward into the stem and leaves and other growing regions. When any plant undergo a senescence, when it is going to die, any plant part, that nutrients are withdrawn from such region or exported and moved to the growing parts. Suppose a leaf is dying, then it will export its particular nutrients. Hormones and plant growth regulators are also there. Another chemical stimuli are also there, that all are transported, though in very small amount, they are also getting transported. So in the flowering plant, we call in angiosperm, as we have discussed, the complex traffic of compound is there, that is probably moving in a different direction, but it is order. Each organ receives something and each organ gives out something. So ultimately, by understanding this, what we have understood, that xylem carry out unidirectional transport and phloem carry out bidirectional multidirectional transport. So this is the journey, short distance and long distance transport and the direction. So water absorption takes place through, obviously we know that it is taken by the root hair which are present on the roots. Transport through xylem is essentially, it is unidirectional from root to the stem. Transport through phloem is usually it is bidirectional and multidirectional. If it is from root to the leaf and leaf to the root, then it is bidirectional. But from root to the leaf to the other different part, then it is multidirectional. Okay. So this is the thing. Now we are going to talk about the means of transport. Means how this transport takes place. What are the types of transport that we are going to study? Okay. And in that means of transport, if you talk, the means of transport is of two types. This transport are of two types. Passive transport and active transport. If we talk about a passive and active transport, passive transport of molecules. So in these molecules move from its high concentration to low concentration. Okay, and in active transport, the molecules or substances or ions move from its low concentration to high concentration. So when molecule is moving from its higher concentration to lower concentration, it is downhill, or we can say according to gradient transport. Whereas here the molecules move from low concentration to higher concentration, so it is a fill or against concentration gradient transport. When molecules are moving from higher to lower, there is no need of energy. So in passive transport, energy or ATP is not needed. Whereas here ATP or energy is required in active transport to move molecule from the low to the high concentration. So ATP or energy is required. Okay, so that is the transport. Now this is the passive transport and this is the active transport, and this way particularly occurs. Now we remember, in passive transport it is further divided into two types, that is diffusion and facilitated diffusion. So now we have to discuss the diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and separately the active transport in detail. So if we talk about the first, the means of transport, and in that if we talk about the first, a diffusion, a simple diffusion, then the movement by diffusion is passive. Obviously, they are the particular passive transport, and it may be from one part of the cell to the another. It can take place within a cell, okay, or it can from intercellular spaces of a leaf to the outside, means from particularly intercellular spaces from leaf to outside, this particular diffusion can take place. Here it is a passive transport, so there is a no energy expenditure. Obviously the molecules are moving in random movement, they are in a random movement, and the molecules, as it is a passive transport, moving from a higher concentration to lower concentration. Obviously, while the molecules are diffusing, they are diffusing from higher concentration to lower concentration, and their movement is slow. And here, any living system is not necessary for diffusion, because diffusion can take place. Suppose a spray bottle is, if the spray bottle liquid is there in a spray bottle, if we spray it, then it comes out in the non-living state. So it is a not dependent on the living system. Okay, so moving from a region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration of ions, particles, or molecules of solid, liquid, or gases, it is known as diffusion. So higher concentration to lower concentration, the molecules are moving. You can see red color higher concentration, the lower concentration they are moving, and this movement will take place. See, green dot balls are coming out and they are evenly distributed. So this diffusion will occur till the equilibrium is established. Okay, till the equilibrium established. You can see here also in this beaker. This is the substance we have dissolved in it. Slowly, slowly it got dissolved and become particularly distributed evenly in the beaker. Okay, so diffusion is obvious in gases and liquids. Okay, but it is not obvious in solids. Okay, so it is a movement of particles and molecules and ions from higher concentration to lower concentration, okay, till the equilibrium is established. So if we talk about features, as we have discussed till now, that it is diffusion is a downhill process, no expenditure of energy, random movement, not dependent on living system. Okay, same way it is not sensitive to the inhibitors. We remember. Why? Because the inhibitors react with the proteins, and here the proteins are not required in this. Now we have to discuss the factors affecting the rate of diffusion, and when we discuss that, now dear students, diffusion is very important to plants, since it is the only means of gaseous movement within the plant body. Within the plant body, only movement of gases occur through this diffusion. And the factors which are affecting the diffusion, if we talk about that, that is the rate of diffusion which is affected by this factor, then the concentration gradient is the one of the important factors. So diffusion, in diffusion, what will happen? Substances move from the region of higher concentration to the region of lower concentration. Gradient must be there. Okay. So if gradients is more, then difference is more, then the diffusion will be faster. If difference is less, then diffusion will be less. Then the permeability of the membrane separating them. The rate of diffusion is directly proportional to the permeability of the membrane. If permeability of membrane is more, diffusion will be easy or faster. Same with temperature. If you increase the temperature, the kinetic energy of the diffusing particle will increase, and ultimately it will lead to the increase in the, particularly we can say, the rate of diffusion. So we remember temperature is directly proportional to the rate of diffusion. Okay, it is directly proportional to the rate of diffusion. Then pressure is there. If we talk about a pressure, then the rate of diffusion is directly proportional to the gradient of diffusion pressure. Okay, so pressure is also directly proportional to the rate of diffusion. Okay, and the next factor is density. Now the rate of diffusion is inversely proportional to the square root of density of, so this density explains the Graham's diffusion law. In this, the density, or sorry, we can say rate of diffusion, is inversely proportional to the density of the particles. And if density, if we talk order of density, then we know that solids are more denser than the liquids and liquids are more denser than the gases. So if we talk density, then density of solids is more than the liquids and liquids is more than the gases. But the rate of diffusion, if we talk, that is more of gases than liquids and then solids. So as the density is less, the rate of diffusion will be fast. If the density will be more, the rate of diffusion will be slower. Now, this is what a diffusion. So what we have studied diffusion in obvious in gases and liquid, but diffusion is solids rather than of solid is more likely. So important note point that diffusion in solids is more common rather than diffusion diffusion in solids is more common rather than diffusion of solids. Okay. Now, and the next factor, if we talk, that is the size of particle. Okay. So fifth factor was that. Now the sixth factor. The sixth factor is the size of particles, which are diffusing particles. Size of diffusing particles inversely proportional to the size of rate of diffusion. If size increases, the rate of diffusion will be lesser or slower or less. So that is the what inversely proportional to the rate of diffusion. So after discussing the diffusion, which is a random for process, randomly the molecules are moving from higher concentration to lower concentration. There is a no membrane, there is a no selectivity, there is no, we can say the particularly any membrane proteins are required. Okay, and these factors will particularly affect the diffusing particles and the diffusion. Now, next we have to discuss the what are the application of diffusion. So when we talk about the application of diffusion, in this application, the first is in plants is the only means of gaseous movement. In plant body, it is only means of gaseous movement. Second, cell to cell movement. For this also this diffusion is occurring. And the third, loss of water vapor during transpiration. Okay, such a way the particularly movement or diffusion is understood and diffusion is known. Now, after diffusion, next we are going to discuss a facilitated diffusion. That is the second type of we can say the passive transport. Now here, dear student, the question is what is facilitated diffusion? So facilitated diffusion is also a type of what we can say the passive transport. So here the molecules movement of molecules occur from a higher concentration to lower concentration, but with the help of certain protein which are present in plant membrane. So in diffusion, what was that? There is a no need of proteins. The diffusion can occur within a cell and between the cell, but with the diffusion, proteins are not required. But here, the proteins are involved, and that proteins are facilitating the movement from higher concentration to lower concentration. Because of this, we are calling it as a facilitated diffusion. So substances outside the cell are this, okay, and in that the this inside cell they were the less concentration. So from the higher concentration, they are moving through these proteins like this. They are bonding with the protein, and the protein show conformational change, and it will be released inside. Like this, through the protein occurring. So it is known as what facilitated diffusion. Now, dear student, the diffusion of any substance across membrane depends on the solubility of lipids, and we know that lipids are the major constituent of the membrane. So substances which are more soluble in lipids will diffuse easily through the membrane or faster, that is by the simple diffusion. But the substances which have a hydrophilic moiety, which are not lipid soluble, which are not lipid soluble, they have a hydrophilic moiety. They are particularly lipophobic. They find difficult to pass through the membrane, and their membrane to be facilitated. So for that, the facilitated diffusion required. Okay, for what it is required? For the transport of hydrophilic substances or the substances that have a hydrophilic molecules. So the diffusion of any substance across the membrane also depends on solubility that we have discussed. Substances soluble in lipids diffuse more through the membrane faster. Substances that have hydrophilic moiety find it too difficult to pass through the membrane, and for them the transport or movement has to be facilitated. Now membrane protein provides a site at which such molecules cross the membrane. Membrane protein are they involved in particularly providing such site for the transport. And you can see this is the particularly membrane proteins and the lipids, and this membrane proteins helping in the transport. Membrane proteins, the one of the important feature is there, membrane proteins do not set up a concentration gradient. The concentration gradient should already be present, then only the particular transport will take place. So a concentration gradient must be already be present for a molecules to diffuse even if facilitated by the proteins. Okay. So concentration gradient must already be present for a molecule to diffuse. Now in facilitated diffusion, special proteins help to move substances across membrane without the expenditure of energy. It is a passive transport, so expenditure of energy is also not going to take place. And Facilitated diffusion cannot cause a net transport of molecules from a low to high concentration, because low to high concentration movement will occur in case of the which one, we can say the uphill transport or active transport. The transport rate, now we remember, the molecules of the substance with the hydrophilic moiety from a region to high concentration that through the transmembrane proteins. So the proteins which are involved in facilitated diffusion, they are also known as transmembrane protein. So transport rate, if you talk, the transport rate reaches a maximum when all the protein transporters are being used. Now next is what? Transport rate. So transport saturation. So when maximum all the protein transporter are being used, it is known as transport saturation. You see, it is simple diffusion, saturation will not occur, only equilibrium will occur. But transport rates this much can occur in a facilitated diffusion because the all the proteins which are embedded in membrane, they will allow a maximum particular maximum molecules, and when all the protein are functional, the facilitated diffusion saturation will occur. Suppose I am showing you this cell. This cell has the four proteins, and when four molecules are moving inside, at the same time the fifth molecule cannot enter. So it is a transport rate saturation. So this is called a transport saturation. Now facilitated diffusion is very specific, and specific molecules are only carried by the special proteins. Facilitated diffusion is sensitive to inhibitors. Diffusion was not. It is sensitive to inhibitors because inhibitors react with the side chains of these proteins or transmembrane proteins and inhibit the transport. So the proteins form channel in the membrane for molecules to pass through. Okay, so proteins are going to form a channel. This is a protein channel. Okay, which is helping in the transport of molecules. It is also known as transmembrane proteins. Some channels are always open and others can be controlled or regulated, and they particularly allow the transport of the substances. So if you talk about transport proteins, the special type of transport protein we have to discuss. And the special type of transport proteins are the porins. And when we talk about the porins, porins are involved in facilitated diffusion, and they are the large size protein, or we can say that form a huge pores in the outer membrane of the plastids, then mitochondria, and some bacteria. See, we remember in the outer membrane of plastid means chloroplast, mitochondria, and bacteria, and that are the large proteins which form the huge pores. And it is also known that these proteins or porins allow molecules up to the size of small proteins to pass through. Means they are that much large that they can allow the transport of some small proteins through it. And this is mitochondria. You can see this is the porins. This is the porine protein structure, actually visible like in a 3D image. One of the example of the porine is water channel made up by 8 different types of aquaporins. Okay, so porins, if we talk, the aquaporins is the one type of porine, and water channel are made up of by 8 different type of aquaporins, and they are involved in facilitation of a transport of the water or water soluble substances. Okay, so be remember, you should remember this data. They are made up of 8 different types of aquaporins. Okay, extracellular movement molecule bound to the transport molecule, then transport protein, then rotate and releases. Now, how this occurs? The transport molecule will come, it will bind to the extracellular membrane, then it will show rotation, and that will be released. So, extracellular molecule bound to the transport protein that rotate and the release the molecules inside the cell. Now, here rotation means what? A conformational change occurring in the transport protein. So now in this facilitated diffusion, we have to understand the symport, antiport, and nidiport. So some transport proteins allow facilitated diffusion only if two types of molecules move together, and some allow only one molecule to enter. So the types of facilitated diffusion are there, and in that, first we are going to talk about a uniport. Uni, as you can, uni means one direction, and transport, port means transport. So if a molecule moves across the membrane independent of the other molecule, it is going only, then it is called a uniport. And here, obviously, a single protein is involved. This protein is facilitating the transport of one molecule in one direction only. So here, see, as you can see, this is the molecule on the outer surface, and this yellow colored are the proteins. Now it is exterior, interior. Then protein, red color molecule move from exterior to interior. That is only in the one direction through the protein. Because of this, we are calling it the uniport. So molecule move across the membrane independent of the molecule in one direction only. Whereas the second one is the co-transport. In co-transport, what will happen? Two molecules will move simultaneously one by one. Okay, they will move together. So some carrier or transport proteins allow diffusion only if two types of molecules move together. And this co-transport, when two types of molecule move together, it is of two types, that is a symport and the antiport. Now, when we talk about the symport, sim means we can say in same direction. So, in a symport, two molecules of different type cross the membrane in the same direction. So, you can see this is the substrate A and substrate B, that is a transport protein. It is a transport protein. It is a substrate A, it is a substrate B, it is a membrane. And when it is passing through it in the only one direction, two molecules are moving, then it is a, we can say, the symport. This both molecule will move in one direction. So it is known as symport. In this you can see here the from the exterior to the interior the molecule is two molecules are moving in one direction in the same direction, so it is known as symport. The another one is the antiport. Anti means opposite. So here the molecules moves across the here the antiport, the molecules move across the membrane in opposite direction. So here sodium calcium is the exchanger is the example. And here this is the exterior, this is the interior. A is in the exterior field, B is in the interior field, and A and B are exchange or crossing in opposite direction, moving in opposite direction. So because of this, we're calling it as antipode. So this is the three types of facilitated diffusion that we have discussed. Now we have to talk about the active transport. After passive transport discussion, next we have to discuss the active transport. So as we have discussed, active transport occurs against concentration gradient, that is from the low concentration to the high concentration. So active transport is also carried out by a membrane protein, and this membrane protein are known as pump, whereas the membrane protein which are involved in facilitated diffusion are known as channel. So active transport uses energy to pump molecules against the concentration gradient, that is from the low concentration. Wherever the molecules are in low concentration, from that if they are moving to the higher concentration, then we can call it as a active transport. But here energy is going to be required, and here you can see this green colored few substances are moving from this to higher region energy is using. So this is the active transport. Okay, here you can see this green color are molecule to the inside and yellow colored moving from lower concentration to high side. Yellow colored are sodium and K plus are green color. So K plus are moving inside the cell from low concentration to high concentration, and sodium is coming outside to the extracellular fluid by the use of ATPG from low concentration to high concentration. So this is what we can say the active transport of sodium potassium pump. Different molecular proteins in the membrane play a major role in both active as well as passive transport. Different proteins play a role. And pumps are the proteins that use energy to carry substances across the cell membrane. So in active transport, the pumps are going to be used. Okay, so this is the proton pump. So proton pump is moving these molecules from its low concentration to high concentration. This is obviously the energy getting used. And these pumps can transport substances from low concentration to high concentration, that is uphill transport. As you can see, the red colored substances moving from low concentration to high concentration through the use of ATP. Now, when the transport occurring in the active transport, what is active transport that we have discussed? The transport reached its maximum, as we have seen in case of the facilitated diffusion in active transport as well. When all the protein transporters are being used, it is known as saturation. So transport saturation occur when all the transporters are being used and the transport reaches maximum, that occur in active transport as well. And like enzymes, the carrier protein is very specific in what it carries. Means these pumps are specific. As we have discussed, channels are specific in case of the vacillated diffusion. These proteins are sensitive to inhibitor, transport inhibition we can call it. Okay, here the inhibitor react with the protein side chain of the pumps or the proteins and inhibit the transport. Okay, so this takes place in this one. This particular active transport is also very specific. Okay, so now this is all about the what active transport, and now we have to understand the comparison. of these different transport processes. And when we compare them, this is the simple diffusion, facility diffusion, active transport, and this is the property. So when we compare the property, first require a special membrane protein. So obviously we have discussed in simple diffusion it is not required. In facility diffusion, obviously they are required, which are known as channel, and in active transport they are required, which are known as pump. Now, when the proteins are involved, proteins are highly selective. They allow a particular specific type of molecules to enter. So when proteins are not involved in simple diffusion, selection can be not be there in a simple diffusion. But facilitated diffusion and active transport have proteins involvement, so they are highly selective. The transport rate saturation or reach which is maximum when there is a proteins involved. So simple diffusion transport rate saturation does not occur, whereas in facilitated diffusion active transport saturation will occur. Then uphill transport is from low concentration to higher concentration, so it occurs in active transport, whereas simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion are passive transport. So in this downhill transport will take place, but active transport takes place in which now uphill transport takes place. Then ATP required. So obviously ATP are required during the uphill transport or active transport, not in case of the simple diffusion and facilitated diffusion. Okay, that we have discussed. Then if we write some more categories, then hormonal control, if we talk, then hormonal control cannot be seen in the diffusion, but it can be seen in case of the facilitated diffusion and active transport. Okay, so this is the hormonal control. After this, the effect of inhibitor, the inhibition we have discussed. One more thing, movement of transport protein. If somebody asks, then we remember it does not occur in case of the diffusion and facilitated diffusion, but it occurs in obviously pump, that is active transport. Okay, so this is what about the particular comparison. So let's discuss some of the MCQs. Diffusion is a slow process, obviously. No energy expenditure in obviously diffusion. Active transport energy is going to be used. Which of the following statement is true regarding a facilitated diffusion? Facilitated diffusion, the smaller substances diffuse faster. Okay, so that is all about the what introductory part of a transporting plant and the different means of transport, that is diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and the active transport, and that we have discussed in detail. Now from next lecture, in next lecture we will discuss the plant water relationship. Okay, till that, thank you everyone.